Every few years, the world counts its nuclear weapons. One country has a few hundred warheads, another has thousands. But there's one bomb that never makes that list, a $700 billion financial bomb. And China is the one holding the trigger. Here's who actually owns America's debt, and why China's so-called nuclear option is really a grenade in its own hand. So first, the proof. This is the debt America owes China, US government IOUs. And right now, China is dumping them. Its stash has fallen to its lowest level since 2008, around $650 billion, down from a $1.3 trillion peak. So make no mistake, the selling is real. Start with the number everyone fights over. In March 2026, the US national debt crossed $39 trillion, for the very first time in history. Every dollar of that is really an IOU. When America needs money, it sells a bond, called a Treasury. You hand over cash today, the US government promises to pay you back in full on a fixed due date, plus a little interest along the way. Totally normal, until you ask who's holding all those IOUs. Here's the twist most people miss. Most of America's debt isn't owed to foreigners at all, it's owed to Americans. US pension funds, banks, and the Federal Reserve. Foreign countries together hold only about $9.4 trillion, roughly 24% of the total. And of that foreign slice, who lends America the most? Start at number 3, that's China, at roughly $693 billion. Number 2, the United Kingdom, around $897 billion. And number 1 isn't China at all, it's Japan, with about $1.24 trillion. Below them, Belgium, the Caymans, Canada, and Luxembourg, each in the 400s. Now watch what that actually means. China's $693 billion, set against a $39 trillion mountain, is just 1.8% of America's debt. Hold on to that number. It quietly tells the whole story. So why fear China's pile at all? Because of timing. These IOUs come due on set dates, from 4-week T-bills, the short ones, all the way out to 30-year bonds. On average, America's whole debt comes due in about 5.8 years. About a third of all US debt, roughly 33%, comes due within 12 months. So it rolls over, borrow from a new lender to pay back the old one, then borrow again to pay that lender. An endless chain, which means it always needs fresh buyers, and that looks like China's leverage. To see that leverage, you have to see how a bond gets priced. America sells its new bonds at auction. After that, they trade between investors in a giant second-hand market, worth over $28 trillion. And in that market, a bond's price isn't fixed. It moves. Here's the one rule that runs it all, a seesaw. Take a $1,000 bond paying 5%. That's $50 a year, and it's fixed. Now if nobody wants it, the price drops, say to $950. The buyer still gets that same $50, but on $950, that's a 5.3% yield. Pay more, $1,050, and the yield falls to 4.8. Price down, yield up. Always. So now pull the trigger. If China suddenly dumped all of its $693 billion at once, it floods that market with bonds for sale. Prices fall, and just like the seesaw says, yields, the interest rates, spike upward. And US Treasury yields aren't just some Wall Street number. They quietly set the price of almost everything else, American mortgages, car loans, credit cards, and the government's own cost of borrowing. So when yields jump, all of it gets more expensive, all at once. And here's why that seesaw becomes a weapon. America has about $28 trillion of this debt it must keep rolling over. So if a dump pushes rates up by just 1 percentage point, the government's interest bill eventually climbs by around $265 billion a year, on top of the more than $1 trillion it already pays. So yes, it really is a bomb. So it's the perfect weapon, right? Here's the catch nobody puts on the thumbnail. To sell $693 billion in bonds, China needs buyers. And dumping that much crashes the price of the very same bonds China is still holding. China would torch its own portfolio first. Tens of billions, gone, on day one. And it gets worse. Those bonds are sold for dollars. Sell them, and China is left holding a flood of US dollars it has to convert back home, which pushes its own currency, the yuan, sharply up. A stronger yuan makes Chinese exports more expensive overseas, and exports are the engine China's entire economy runs on. The weapon hits the shooter. And that's the real shape of this thing. It isn't a gun pointed at America. It's a gun where the recoil knocks down the person firing it. And even the blast is smaller than it sounds. Remember that number, China's stake is 1.8% of US debt. The Federal Reserve alone could buy more than that. And the Treasury market trades hundreds of billions of dollars every single day, easily enough to swallow a Chinese fire sale and barely flinch. And here's an even bigger plot twist. A lot of China's so-called selling may not be selling at all. As China's holdings fell by about 600 billion over the years, the tiny country of Belgium's holdings rose by roughly 500 billion. Belgium is home to one of the world's biggest custody houses, so much of the dumping is really just China moving its bonds to a different address. Because what China is really doing isn't a panic, it's a slow goodbye. Over more than a decade, it's quietly trimmed its US debt from that 1.3 trillion peak, and shifted into other things, most of all, gold. This isn't a country firing a weapon. It's a country diversifying. So what is China's nuclear option, really? It's less a bomb it can drop on America, and more a grenade it's holding in its own hand. Real, yes. But almost impossible to throw without losing a few fingers. And here's the final irony. The biggest threat to America's debt was never China at all. It's that $1 trillion a year interest bill, on a debt America mostly owes to itself, growing larger every single year. So I want to know what you think. Is China's hoard of US debt a real weapon, an empty bluff, or one it's already quietly diffused? Pick one, and tell me why down in the comments. And if you want to understand the hidden machinery behind the global economy, one clear breakdown every week, subscribe to Plainomics. Like, share, and I'll see you in the next one.